Good day, everyone. My name's Marcus Vaughan. Welcome to the Big Resilience Reset Round 2. As I mentioned, Marcus Vaughan, I'm the co-founder of Illumina, and today's webinar is the webinar that breaks all of the rules. You're absolutely in good company today. We're joined with over 200 risk and resilience professionals that are representing 18 different countries, and that literally includes everywhere from Norway to Italy to Costa Rica to the US to the UK, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and pretty much everywhere in between. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel. First and foremost, one of our regulars, and who I would call a guest of honor, who is now a regular panelist of mine, James Green. James is the co-founder of Illuminate Advisory, which helps organizations harness the power of risk. And he's also one of the co-founders of the Resilience Think Tank, amongst many, many other things. James, welcome back.
Good morning, Marcus. Thank you for waking up at, I don't even know what time it is there. I can't do that kind of math, but we appreciate you having us back again for another big resilience reset.
It is good to be back, and I definitely have quite a few coffee beans running through the veins already, which is fantastic. Secondly, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome a new panelist for the first time to the Big Resilience Reset, and obviously the first, but it definitely won't be the last for sure. Vanessa Vaughn Mathews. So Vanessa is a Chief Resilience Officer at Asfalis Advisors, and is also the host of the Business Resilience Decoded podcast, again, amongst many, many other things. Very impressive lady. Go to LinkedIn and you'll know what I'm talking about. Vanessa, welcome to the Big Resilience Reset. Great to have you.
Thank you. And just so the audience knows, Marcus and I are not related. We checked.
We've done the DNA testing to confirm.
Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, hey guys, there's no better time than now. We may as well get stuck straight into this. So general format, I'm going to throw some big questions up. We've had some questions come through from the audience in the lead up to this, but I'm going to start throwing some questions around, and we're going to get your perspectives on things and get stuck into it. So I think just based on what's happening in the world right now, it'd be absolutely remiss if we did not talk about the conflict between the Ukraine and Russia at the moment. It is potentially the biggest global event of our generation's lifetime. And some might argue it's got the ability to dwarf even COVID. But I guess the question mark for this audience and panel is, are we talking about this enough in risk and resilience circles? And in particular, I mean, obviously yourselves included, you're involved in a lot of boardroom and executive table discussions. Are we talking about it enough at a strategic level within organizations? James, I'm gonna lob that one up for you to take a swing at.
I love it. So last time you asked me if business continuity is dead is my softball question, and this time you asked me to comment on the Ukraine, which you know is one of my hot buttons. So thank you very much for that. I'm not much for hyperbole, right? I'm a very mild-mannered, quiet person. But let me say this, I really feel that what is happening in Ukraine right now has the biggest potential to go sideways from a nuclear perspective since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I really want everybody to think about that, because I've never said something that bombastic before. But there's a great book, 1 Minute to Midnight, about the Cuban Missile Crisis. You read that and you look at what's happening today, and there's a lot of scary parallels. So you asked me, are we talking about this enough? Yeah, fine, we're talking, but what are we doing as resilience professionals? I'm tired of people talking, spending time with a client this week, and I've been on calls 24/7, just like Vanessa has, just like you and your team have. Your risk in Europe are changing in real time. And, there's a lot of people who think your risk in China might change right now if China decides to make some decisions on Taiwan. There's too much going on right now. I think it's our job to educate executives on these emerging risks. And so I think it's first and foremost, we need to educate ourselves, not just on this from a humanitarian point of view or political point of view, but from a risk point of view. What are we doing? How are we helping organizations? We have, and we know people, and we were talking about it before we went live, people that we know personally are being affected by this today in real time. And what are the actions we're taking.
Vanessa, any thoughts from your perspective about where this sits at the moment in the exec table?
So a couple of thoughts. One, I'll share. I'm on a nonprofit or a board of directors, boarding and commissions with the city of Charlotte, and we're appointed to help advise our city leadership on international affairs, whether it be foreign direct investment or the immigrant community. And this is the number one topic that's on the table now. We have a sister city called Voronezh in Russia, and our city has an established relationship with them. And now the conversation's on the table of, do you sever that relationship or not? And how do you do so in such a way so that, this particular city in Russia may or may not care or, want to be engaged with what their leader is doing, in which they don't have control over. But what happens if other cities around the world start to experience what's happening in Russia? Do you just sever ties? Do you stop those relationships? Like, how does that work? And have we truly thought through what are those repercussions? And I often too say that I think we as the United States, that's where James and I live, we're probably one or two presidents away for getting somebody like Putin in our White House. Like, let's just be real. And what's happening in Russia, most countries in the global society throughout history, they've done the same thing. That's how they've grown. That's how they've scaled. So it's not like it's never happened before. It just hasn't happened in our lifetime. And so for us, I am, yes, at the table with leaders to help talk about resolutions on these relationships. But also from a business perspective, I was talking to a client today. We're talking about it from a supply chain standpoint and the raw materials that are associated, the manufacturing process, distribution, the cost of inflation. They're concerned about the defense and security systems from a US perspective. And I also feel like what Russia showed us and other extremists is, how do you come in and take over? You attack critical infrastructure. And in the United States, 85+% of our CIKR critical infrastructure and key resources is owned by our private sector. And so, like, how many people have that as your next exercise? Yeah. The big four has pulled out of Russia. I saw a post on Instagram. There are fines for organizations who are not enforcing these sanctions. And quite frankly, I was doing a presentation in November of last year and talking about COVID. Over 90% of our medical supplies in America come from where? China. 90%. Like, just think about that. So somebody said today, well, America needs to start making jobs at home. I don't know how many presidents have promised that, but they have not delivered. It's not happening. And quite frankly, now it's reactive. But we don't have enough manufacturing and things made specifically from an American perspective. It's not enough made at home. Yeah. And so when we talk about the impact, this feels, I'm getting into another question, but there's just so many things. And I think to James's point, we need to be having a conversation about what are we doing versus, oh, this is what's the headline on the news.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think to mirror those thoughts, Vanessa, I don't think there'd be many Western countries that probably don't have that balance of country production versus reliance on China. For a lot of things, medical equipment and PPE being just one of them. But it does, I mean, there's a big question there. A couple of things came out of that. This hasn't happened, this type of conflict or potential size of conflict hasn't happened in our lifetime, but it has happened. I mean, we just had the same conversation about COVID. Pandemics have happened. They just hadn't happened in my lifetime and a lot of people's lifetime. What lessons did we just learn from COVID that we absolutely cannot forget moving into this situation that we're currently moving in, given the fact that, again, you look at COVID, a lot of activity in March when, it finally got declared as an epidemic to pandemic. we're now looking at this. It's potentially very early days still. What do we need to draw on from the last 2 years, 2.5 years, that we can take in to better navigate this situation for the next 6, 12, 24, 36, 70, however months it takes? James?
So first I want to acknowledge there's a lot of people in the chat. I asked, has your organization been affected by what's happening in Ukraine? And there's a lot of people sharing. So I encourage everyone to keep talking, how that's impacted you, how we can work together. So what have I learned? What can I not forget about COVID, thinking about Ukraine? The first thing, I see a lot of people, and a lot of people even asked me after I've popped off and said some things about Ukraine and my personal feelings, and say, well, what about Yemen? Don't you care about what's happening in Yemen? Or don't you care about what's happening in Ethiopia? You're damn right I do. Of course I care about what happened, but I'm tired about, especially in the United States, this discourse of whataboutism. It's our job as resilience professionals to be thinking about these types of conflicts and how they affect our organizations, our communities. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned that's really been driven home the last couple of weeks is, to me, being resilient means knowing and being comfortable with the fact that what worked yesterday in our profession and to mitigate risk probably isn't going to work today. And it's definitely not going to work tomorrow. We really need to be, agile in the sense of being prepared for whatever's going to happen, because something crazy is going to happen next. We talked about this the last time, and since then we've had a war in Europe that wasn't even, on anyone's radar. So it's always what I've learned coming out of COVID and coming out of the last 2 years is that resilience really means that unexpected, that unknown is going to happen.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, Russell Harvey, number one, it's great to see you in the chat line. It's always good to have you. Thanks for coming along. Question mark there, I think, is, have we as a resilience community got consensus on what we've truly learned from the pandemic? I think it's probably going to be a little bit different for everyone, but I think as a consensus, that's a great question. Have we actually identified and as a discipline agreed, here's some key lessons that we are going to say goodbye to some certain practices or processes or approaches and say hello to some new ones. Vanessa, I'm interested in your take here. What do you think that we can take from the last 2 years of whatever that was? Feels like a blur and not in a good way. What can we take into this current conflict and move forward for the next 2 years?
Yeah. So one thing I recall about COVID is it showed us what we already knew, but in many cases, it exacerbated things that we just didn't deal with. So what I mean by that is, I'm a small business owner. COVID exacerbated the impact of small businesses, how vulnerable most really, really, really are. It showed the health disparities and the lack of unequal equity when it comes to health around the world. It showed the impacts for the lack of access to capital. You had, especially in America, billions of dollars were deployed, but Black and brown businesses were not getting access to those dollars. So there's still a disconnect, which means our systems, our financial services systems, were still holding people back from getting access to that capital. Mm. And then it also exposed the digital divide. You have people in rural parts of our world and rural parts across the economy, and they did not have access to technology. So when you transition to a fully online environment, there was no way for people to engage, and the infrastructure had to be developed. And I think the other thing that I was reading up on today, going back to James's point, is we have to be engaged, and we have to be in a space where we're taking time to learn about what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. The emerging risk on food insecurity. There's two things there's three things that we're not going to do as people. We cannot not have water. We cannot not have food. And we can't work without sleep. going back to our point earlier, the basic things that we need as people. And there are resources and raw materials and things that we get from these countries, and especially other parts of Europe. And the more this happens and the more challenges that we see in this space, there is a big concern for food insecurity, which again was a pre-existing condition prior to COVID. So those are the lessons that I think we cannot forget. And then we're still managing the response to COVID. Like, we're still in a pandemic. It's just not the top news headline today.
Yeah, good reminder. Thank you for that.
Think about where we're at now, that year 3 of a global pandemic is now number 2 on our list of worries. So, and then, yeah, Vanessa, Ukraine has been called the breadbasket of Europe for a reason. That's not just a cute slogan. That part of the world feeds a much larger part of the world. You had food insecurities coming into prior to the global pandemic and a possible war. And it's just going to get worse.
Yeah. Okay. So let me pose this to you. We are a profession. We have, I guess, a responsibility as a profession. We're people that think this way. We think about impact. We think about, the impacts and the onflowing effects of various impacts, probably more than a lot of other people do outside of the risk and resilience sphere. How do we actually create that influence to broaden that perspective, though, amongst individuals, again, that might sit around a boardroom table or an executive table? I hear a lot of practitioners, and this isn't just in Australia, this is literally everywhere, often make comment that they don't feel like they have a seat at the table. How do we elevate that level of influence to get organizations, which will eventually flow out into the community, about having that thought process, having that level of influence?
Marcus, did you just ask us how we get a seat at the table? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
How do we get a seat at the table for this conversation?
I'm gonna sit. I want Vanessa to answer this one first. I'm just sit back here and eat some popcorn, because now we're getting real.
So let me first say why I think some of us don't have a seat. I think sometimes for some people, either we're taught that we don't know how to. So we're not taught, right? When I came out of college, I don't even know what a seat at the table meant. Like, it took me getting into business to understand, oh, that's what that means. So many people don't know how. For some people, it might be your personality. Or many people may not know how to deal or manage your existing or your internal environment. And so I think those are some reasons that might stem why some people don't have a seat at the table. But here's what I will say. So I mentioned earlier that I chair a board with the city of Charlotte. And when I started this board, we did not have a seat at the table. We didn't get the attention of the mayor, of the city manager, of city council. And I am in the process of transitioning this chair to another person. And the next chair asked me, what is my role? I said, my job was to get you a seat at the table. Your job is to keep the seat at the table. And so what does that mean? How do you get a seat at the table? For me, that looks like boldness, stepping outside of my comfort zone to understand city government, how it works, what's important, what's in your strategy, what's in your budget, what are you paying for, and how can we leverage what you've asked us to do into what you're paying for and what's a priority for you and the organization. The second thing we had to do was to do our part. We had to be where they are. So if you don't read your 10K reports, or if you're not aware of the strategic documents that are coming down through your organization, if you're not on the earnings calls, or if you're in a city, county, or a state legislature and you're not attending those legislative meetings or understand the process for how your company does business, you're not doing your part yet. Number 3, we had to create a business case. And for us, that was a white paper to validate our relevance and why this matters and why it's important. And then we had to engage a data analyst to leverage the data to help make this case a no-brainer. We had to keep showing up whether we were invited or not. We have to have a clearly defined ask, right? So what specifically do you want? What specifically specifically does a seat at the table look like? Like, you want to just sit down and have a chair? You want to influence policy? You want to influence work streams? You want to be invited to certain meetings? Like, I think we have to, I'm a woman of faith. Like, there's a scripture that says, write the vision and make it plain. You need to be explicitly clear about what it is that you want to accomplish and your expectations of the person that you're looking to influence and engage. And lastly, you got to bring your own seat. And that's what I find in this space. Every single job I've ever had in business continuity, in crisis management, and when I worked in local government, it was created. I didn't come in and fill somebody's shoes. I was the first person to do the job, which half the time meant I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So I had to literally bring my own seat to the table. But today, when I look back, I'm an African-American, female, millennial that has more influence with C-suite executive leadership than my peers combined. And all of that comes from knowing how to establish your seat and being bold in your authority. And so that's what we need as an industry. If you're coming out of COVID and you don't have that seat out of COVID, here's your next opportunity. But you can't keep swinging and not hit the ball. We need you to hit a home run on this one.
It was good. James, you got anything to add to that?
You know, just a few things. One, everyone who ever asked me why they don't have a seat at the table, I'm now going to point them to what Vanessa just said and be done with it. You know, but one thing that crosses my mind, why do you think you should have a seat at the table? If it's just because, oh, it'll make my job easier, that's not good enough. Nobody cares. You need to be solving problems for your organization outside your vertical. I love that Vanessa said, if you're public, you need to be reading 10Ks. You need to understand the business. You need to bring more to the table than you're the resilience manager, because you won't be led in the table if that's all it is.
Yeah, that doesn't feel like it's a 9-to-5 thing either, to be perfectly honest.
No, it's not.
Like, just saying. I've got a whole heap of stuff here. This is probably not a bad way to segue onto, though.
Can I add something, Marcus?
Yep. Vanessa, please.
So the other part of that, which I think James said it earlier, is how do you stay at the table?
Oh yeah,
right?
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So when I make this transition to my next board chair, what's my role? So number one, I'm leveraging my capabilities of myself and my entire team. I've got a 21-member advisory board. Number two, a succession plan. We're continuity people. We know how to do that, right? Number three, engage them with leadership. So as I make this transition, I'm going 90 days out. I'm going to start engaging my next leader 90 days out, and you're going to know who I know. And you're going to understand, how do they communicate? How do we engage? What's our frequency? What should you be paying attention to that they care about, right? And I think too, you have to show people how you got here. Some of you have a seat at the table, and this is not your problem. But what I would challenge you on is, have you helped everybody else in your organization to see how you got your seat at the table before you forget? Because some of us have forgotten how we did that. And people don't sign up for webinars to know the what, they sign up to know the how, right? You also have to influence and remain relevant. What's getting me a seat at the table today is not going to be sustainable for my next board chair next year, right? And then lastly, all my clients, they shoot guns, they play golf, they travel the world. Guess what I do? I shoot guns, I play golf, I travel the world. If you want to maintain that seat, you've got to be where they are and build relationships. I have conversations about sports I don't even care about. But guess what? If it takes a 4-hour game to accelerate my relationship with you, that's fine. Because I have the influence. Because we need to be so good as continuity and crisis professionals that you can't be ignored. Think about that. How can you be so good that you can't be ignored? And that's how you stay at the table. James, what you got?
Now we're getting real. Now we're getting real. And it's so important, Marcus. Everyone does ask, how do I get a seat at the table? And no one ever asks, how do I keep the seat? And what Vanessa said is totally true. And so let's go further. Let's drop some more truth as people are freaking out here over on my side monitor, wondering how we've gotten off the rails so quick. But in reality, for me, and I don't think anyone wants to hear this, but do you know how to play the game? Do you know who the players in the game are? Can you sell yourself? Can you sell your value? Not just your program's value, not just the importance of resilience. Playing the game is about, here's why James should stay here. Vanessa talked about being relevant. Here's why James is relevant. Being at the table is political, because there's usually a finite set of chairs. And if you have one, someone wants it. So, you don't always earn that seat. You have to take it. And I think a lot of people make the mistake. It's not a Supreme Court appointment. It's not yours for life. Vanessa said it exactly. If you're not relevant, if you're not continuing to add value, if you're not continuing to build those relationships, you will lose that seat. Marcus, your co-founder Josh just said something great. What I love here in the Josh chat, can you level up your thinking to be more strategic and not just operational? Tactical people are not at the table for long. Yeah. They're at the table for a fleeting minute while something super tactical is happening, and then those people roll off and get put back in the dustbin. That strategy is really key.
Yeah. So it's not about the spreadsheet. Wow. But the question mark I've got then is let's merge this into skill set, because I think, again, a lot of people think about the technicalities behind our discipline and probably forget a lot about the skill set. I mean, some big things that came out there is relationship building, knowing your audience, knowing what matters to your audience, and then knowing how to play the game. From a soft skills perspective, what do you see as being absolutely critical and potentially missing at the moment? Again, painting a generalized brush, but what do we see as being absolutely critical and absolutely missing in our industry and discipline?
Well, I will start this off. We actually just did an event a couple weeks ago, and it was what you wish you would have learned about careers in crisis management. Because everybody that we've seen is experiencing some type of an issue with the skills gap and with hiring. And we did a poll. Hiring managers said over 70% of them are having an issue with candidates not representing their skills. On the other side, the candidates said, I don't know how. Let's just think about that. A lot of people really don't know how. How do I translate that? How do I show you that? And whether it's a skill set of agility, whether it's a skill set of leadership, whether it's a skill set of thinking strategically, there's many gaps that exist within that framework. But the question is how do we help people to understand how to make it show up? If you're transitioning from the police department into this space, what's the transferable skill and how do you bring that out? And it's literally causing a whole nother crisis for many companies. My clients in aviation do not have enough people to work at the airport. They do not have the capacity. They do not have the bandwidth to do their normal job because they're losing people. And they can't hire great talent because you're not showing up in the interview because you can't translate your skills. That is a crisis. So we've got work to do.
Yeah, there's a general art of storytelling that's absolutely missing in that. Then, like, there's one thing that drops away many times is people can show up with data but not really understand how to actually translate that into a story or a narrative or an arc that connects data to what the audience may need to hear or even care about. James, I'm interested in your perspective. You do a lot of work with a lot of people, actually, including mentorship. I mean, what do you see?
I think Reena Singh in the chat hit it. Sales skills are something we could all use in resilience. And if you think sales or the word sales is a bad word, I can guarantee pretty much you're not successful in your career. Sales isn't about forcing someone to buy something they don't want. I think that's sales in the worst sense. But like Vanessa talked about, how do you share the skills that you have? How do you relate to someone? How do you find out what someone needs and if you can meet that need? And a lot of times sales is about realizing you can't meet that need. But if you can't sell yourself, I mean, how is your career moving in any field? Because you have to sell your supervisor or your manager or a customer. You have to convince someone that you're worth being promoted, that you're worth a shot at the table, that they're worth the investment of time. I mentor, just like you guys, I mentor a lot of people, and I put in as much time and energy as they do. They have to sell me first that it's worth my time because it's worth their time. And that, to me, that's part of sales.
Yeah, indeed. I think you touched on it before as well, James, around understanding and articulating value really, really clearly and succinctly. Okay.
And that goes back to what you said, Marcus. A spreadsheet is not not moving a needle with an executive. They don't care. That's not their job. You have to show them the bigger picture. What do those numbers mean? Why do they matter?
Yeah. Vanessa, you touched on a really interesting point before around going where your audience are, understanding your audience, working with that audience, shooting guns, playing 4-hour games. It's good. I mean, you clearly know how to work into a cohort, which is fantastic. I've got a bigger question around diversity, equity, and inclusion, though, in terms of how the world is going, how our organizations are going on this front in terms of diversity of thought, being inclusive of thought, regardless of background and what that looks like. Do you think we are making progress? Are you seeing progress in organizations on this, or are we still seeing a huge amount of table dressing?
So I will say, since the murder of George Floyd in 2020, I've been doing a lot of work with organizations who now see this as a risk in their business because it affects people and how they're showing up and their engagement. And it's also affecting their reputation on where they stand. And so I think some are working and some are not. For the ones that are working, it looks like a highly engaged leadership team member at the highest level of the company. It looks like accountability, which is driven through, in my opinion, compensation and data in your employee numbers. And I also think James Green is a great representation of what that looks like when you hold yourself accountable to making equity and inclusion a part of your primary focus. It's a primary point of conversation for people in organizations where it is working. Those leaders are sharing their shortcomings publicly. They're leading with diversity and inclusion. It is fully funded. And people feel as though they belong and they can speak up without repercussions. In the organizations where we have partnerships where it's not working, there is no budget, there is no strategy. The board of directors and the leadership team lacks diversity. They all look the same and have the same thoughts. Their minorities are afraid to speak up and to truly come to work to be themselves. The leadership team does not own it. They're not public about it. And I'm going to say a caveat here because this is a provocative conversation. I can't tell you how many risk management, business continuity, crisis management, and business resilience conferences will not accept a conversation on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I will tell you, if you are in the audience and you have influence at these conferences, I am probably talking about the organizations that you represent. I cannot tell you how many topics, not just from myself, but from other people, my agents, brothers and sisters, who are bringing these things up and you will not accept them, which means our industry is complicit. That's why we have 85% of our firms our emergency managers are white males. Less than 1% of emergency managers are African Americans. Less than 1? That's systemic. So we got work to do. That's what that means. There's nothing but opportunity.
I think maybe that's why people are turning up to the Big Resilience Reset as well. Hey, we're comfortable having a conversation. James, I mean, I'm interested in your thoughts as well. Again, you're working across a whole host
now
of
I got two. Now here we go. So no, we're not making progress, Marcus. And the problem is, whenever any issue, if the majority is not speaking about the issue, if the majority is not taking action about the issue, we're not making progress. And Vanessa knows, because what Vanessa was talking about, I have experience. I speak at a lot of conferences. I love to hear myself talk. You all know that. I was rejected from 2 conferences last year. Every other conference I asked to speak at or was asked to speak at, I spoke at. There were 2 that my topic was rejected, and it was with my friend Vanessa, where you had 2 people, not minorities, Vanessa and myself, speaking on the topic of race in our profession. And we still have yet to speak on that topic because no one will let that sucker air. So I think right now we're at the point where a lot of people, they want check the box, they want diversity, equity, and inclusion that's comfortable and not scary and not provocative. And so as long as, frankly, white men in this country aren't speaking about it, it's okay. But if people like me want to speak about it, the answer has been unequivocally hell no. And it is frustrating and interesting that, you know, I can speak anywhere on a lot of different things, but that's the one topic that is still taboo. So I think we have, you know, a long way to go on that topic and on that journey.
Well, we have 200 people watching today. Why don't we actually just make the call that if you're part of an association, please email them today and request that within their next conference agenda, there is at least a topic on diversity and inclusion. Like, I don't want to be having the same conversation in 12 months' time, and I don't want that response in 12 months' time. Like, that's a bit ridiculous. So, I mean, if there's anything that we can do here, like, why don't we actually just put that to the conference organizers that we are involved in to please accept the audience request to at least have a conversation about it so we can make some sort of iterative movement on that. Please. That's a call out for everyone. I'll drop that in the chat afterwards. That would be good. Vanessa, is there anything else you want to touch on that? I mean, it's a big conversation. There's a lot of rabbit holes there we could go right down. And I was expecting a more buoyant answer, to be perfectly honest.
Well, in light of Women's History Month, I just dropped a link into the chat, and it's a book called Hood Feminism. I'm reading it with my Booked and Busy book club. Awesome book. And we talk a lot about feminists, but what this book talks about is how the feminist movement was only for white women. It was not for other women. And what I love is that this author goes into detail about different components of life and how they are feministic movements, but you don't hear that on the global stage. And so here's something that somebody taught me a long time ago. No matter what you believe, no matter how you stand on an issue, in order for this person, and he was a top economist for Wells Fargo Bank, read a book that you agree with and read a book that you disagree with. You don't have to ever agree with it. But if you commit to being ignorant, no, that's not okay. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Vanessa. I purposely follow people on Twitter that I agree with and that people I do not agree with at all, because I never want to get in that feedback loop of just, you know, everyone agrees with me. So where are those perspectives, whether I agree with them or not? And that, I think that's how you drive meaningful change, is exposing people to ideas or thoughts that are different than theirs.
Yeah, I mean, it's important not to get stuck in an echo chamber, right? I think that's critical. Okay, well, I'm gonna keep moving. I'm conscious time is burning as it always does. This goes always too quick.
Vanessa, you have a lot of new fans in the chat, so I want to stop here. I want to thank Marcus. I want to thank you and Josh, because when you guys came to me and said, hey, we want to do another big resilience reset before DRJ spring, and who should we talk to? And I had one name I gave you, and I kept beating you guys over the head. I said, you need to work with my friend Vanessa on this. So I want to thank you guys for bringing her into this conversation and sharing her, her thoughts and experiences. I think it's really important. It seems very meaningful chat is happening and dialogue, which is kind of the whole point of this series.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think we'll take a moment to thank Vanessa for a couple of moments that are already stuck with me, and I'm going to be taking with me and contemplating for the rest of today and probably the weekend as well, because that's where we are in Australia at the moment. We've got a couple of moments left for a couple of last questions, and I do want to. I know we've answered a few coming through from the channel already. We knew that was always going to happen. I do want to take a moment just to touch on, I guess, the people side of resilience as well. We've just come through, or to your point, Vanessa, we're not even out of the pandemic yet. So people are worn pretty thin, and I don't just mean our discipline. I think right across the board, people are worn pretty thin. People are breaking, people are resigning, and I think in those cases, I can totally empathize with that in a lot of those instances. Where do you think we are in terms of people risk in organization resilience? Do you think we've nailed that yet, or are we still trying to work out where that fits in and how that fits in?
No, we're still trying to figure out what our BIA template is.
Oh,
No shade.
Oh my goodness. Now you're just setting the world on fire with that.
Here's what I think. I think people have had time over the past 2 years to think, because the world was shut down. So you were forced to sit at home and think and process and evaluate and reconsider. And I think people have a new perspective on what work looks like. I think people are exhausted. I talked to my friends in the mental health world. I'm a professor. I've brought in some mental health counselors to talk to my students. Completing suicide is one of the top 10 causes of death in America. Our kids are going through it. If your kids are on social media, they're depressed. They have thoughts that they probably shouldn't have. And it's a collective burnout that's happening everywhere. And so I don't think that we've honestly had time to even address people things. I was talking to an HR manager the other day, and she asked me to help her with something. And I said, you do know this is not going to solve the issue, right? You got an engagement, you got a belonging, you got a values, you got a cultural issue that was there before the pandemic. But now you want a plan that's really not going to help you to solve your particular issue. So I can say for me personally, kind of how I keep myself sane, if you will. Number one is my faith. Number two, I've had to learn to stay present with my family. If I'm going on a walk with my husband and James calls, I cannot talk to James, right? I work out. I seek a mental health counselor, and I sit right here on my couch and I cry. And I think it's also about setting boundaries. I have a client who calls me like on Saturdays and Sundays, and I'm like, dude, no, like I'm not. So I don't think we figured that out yet. But I also do think, we talked about this on the prep call. My clients within the organization, I have several. I have HR, technology, business continuity, corporate security, learning and development. For James and I as consultants, if those are our clients and you work inside the business, those should be your clients. You should be having conversations and building programming and resources and talking about risk to your HR team, because people risk matters, and you can't run a business without quality people.
James, I mean, I've got a lot to add to that. And before I ask you the question, I mean, Vanessa, do we need to, as resilience professionals, outline that from an impact perspective to actually go back to root cause, as opposed to trying to talk about a response strategy to deal with the after effects, and actually look forward and go, well, okay, that's the potential after effects. We need to take that back to root cause discussion, again, elevating from operational to strategic. I mean,
yes. Yeah. Yes. And it's the same thing with the seat at the table. What's the business case? Where's the data?
Yeah.
Create the seat. If they don't see it as a priority, we have a retail client. They're like a top 10 retail client. And people risk is on their 10K report.
Yeah, leverage it.
Yeah, I think, frankly, the people side is a mess right now. And I think just like how we all need to be pointing out and talking about inequality, I think we all need to talk about mental health and remove the stigma of talking about mental health. We weren't designed as professionals. Josh mentioned in the comments, where are the boundaries for our profession when we're supposed to be always on?
Yeah.
We weren't designed for a 3-year incident. We weren't designed for concurrent crisis, and people are struggling. I told you guys before the call, so I'll share it now with everybody. I had a minor mishap on Sunday, which in the scheme of things shouldn't have meant anything to anybody, to anything. There was no impact. It didn't matter in my life. And I couldn't handle it because it was just like, it was one bridge too far. It was one, pick your analogy. It was just one thing too many. And I ended up crying in public, which is like a sign of, hey, something's going on here. And I think we need to recognize where we're at as a profession. I think we need to recognize where we are as people in that profession, and we need to talk to each other. Vanessa mentioned earlier about George Floyd, and she and I, we were colleagues, and I really feel, Vanessa, when you and I became friends was that week when you and I were talking and grappling with the feelings that we had, and sharing with my kids and sharing what you said to them. Like, that's when we became true friends, because we took down those barriers. Like, hey, here's a person who's suffering, here's another person who's suffering, we have commonality. How do we help each other? And I think we need to do better of that in our profession right now. We're in year 3. People are breaking. There's going to be, BC Management does an annual compensation survey for business continuity. Some of the stuff that's going to come out, 50% of the people in our profession are either open to new positions or plan on looking. That's half of our entire profession is saying, I want to move somewhere else. That's a massive problem.
Yeah.
And that really tells me that, we need to be more honest about what the last 2 or 3 years have done for us mental health wise as a profession, and also as people.
Yeah, well, you add up a lot of instances like that, James, and that's our community at risk. Society. Let's go a little bit broader. Let's go a little bit more expansive. But I think David Yarbrough made a really good point. Organizations doing a lot to attract new people and give them a great deal. What about everyone else that's still there?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the loyalty? Where's the loyalty?
Yeah.
And so our role in that as resilience professionals must be to identify what the impact would be should we not invest into these strategies of wellness. Correct me. Okay.
Yeah, you're seeing more and more organizations realize that employees' physical health actually impacts the bottom line in a positive way. And that's why there's reimbursements for gyms and healthcare and these things. And I think we need to be doing the same thing with the mental health of our employees. If you're having, just completely crass capitalist, if you're having a bad day, you're not productive. And companies need to realize that, the fragility of people, what's happened the last couple of years, they will just leave.
Yeah.
They'll just start over. They'll go somewhere else.
Which is really expensive.
Yeah.
Which is very expensive.
And Dr. David Linstead actually did research on that. And there's data to show that especially post-disaster.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something for us to pay attention to.
Where is David? Why is David not in the chat channel? I need to email David. David, get in here. Okay. All right. We are pretty much out of time, guys. I do want to thank everyone. Again, the chat channel has been out of control again today, which is fantastic. So thank you everyone for turning up. And I mean that not just by turning up and sitting on the bench, I mean by turning up and contributing. I told you we're probably not all going to agree on things, but that's the whole point. Guys, before I wrap though, and I'm going to jump into a few call outs in a moment. Key action items. If there's one actionable thing you want people to take away and take back to their organization, or not even take back to their organization, take back for their own career, what do you want to give people? What's the one nugget of advice today? I'm going to go James.
Listen to Vanessa's podcast.
Fantastic.
No, but seriously, I'm going to issue a call to action to everyone on the call, and I want you to think about what are you passionate about in our profession, and I want you to go do that. Go do more of that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good. Vanessa?
This stems from a conversation James and I were having on another panel, and this person forgot where they came from. And so my call to action is going to be for people who you've already reached your level of, whatever success means to you. If you have your seat, if you have your program, if you have your career, if you have the right relationships, if you have all the I haves that some of us are still trying to get and learn, my call to action to you is to reach back and show your colleagues the steps you took to get there. Because in a society where most employers are saying year over year that the skills gaps are not coming across, that means that we're not mentoring, we're not reaching back, we're not helping people to understand how to do what you know how to do. And so we need to serve in this profession. The next generation of leaders is here. I believe by the next 2 or 3 years, 75% of the workforce will be millennials. And then we've got the Gen Z next. We need you to go back and show the how.
Yeah, that's very powerful, Vanessa. Thank you very much for that. I think if there's anything to add to that from my perspective, probably just recalling out what I said before around diversity inclusion. Email your association today and ask that the next agenda has a diversity inclusion track. It's not a session, put a track. This is big enough and ugly enough that I think we need to invest into it. I don't want to be having this conversation again and again and again and again. Otherwise, the big resilience reset is going to get very repetitive. Very repetitive. Okay, excellent. We are pretty much coming to an end. Anything final, James, Vanessa, that you want to flag before I'm going to obviously do a few call outs in terms of what we're doing next and where you can see us. But guys, anything final thoughts?
No, let's talk about when we're going to see each other in person.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's happening. It's happening.
It is happening. It's good to actually see people and be rejuvenated again. Conferences are back, and that is fantastic. I tell you what, when I went and did DRI back in Las Vegas with James and Josh as well, my co-founder, and it was probably one of the most rejuvenating things I've done. Just do a quick visual check. You can see the screen in terms of the dates and things coming up there. Is that coming up?
Yes.
So we are everywhere over the next month. So March and April are big months at the moment. First things first, we have a microsimulation masterclass, which is about how to boost engagement and resilience by 300%. That's coming up on the 15th, 16th of March, depending where you are. If you're Australia, it's the 15th. It's going to be the 16th and the other way around, 15th in the US and 16th in Australia. Following that, we're all at DRJ Spring. All of us are going to be at DRJ. So we know, Vanessa, you're going to be up on the microphone for pretty much 3 days in a row. As far as I'm aware, I think you're MC of DRJ Spring, which is going to be fantastic. James, I believe you've got at least one session on Resiliency Transformed. I know I've got the privilege of talking on a couple of, on a panel and a presentation, and I know Illumina, we have a booth. We are a gold sponsor this year at DRJ Spring, and we will be giving out our microsimulation cards. So you can come along and get 10 complimentary microsimulations, which is always fun. Love to have a big conversation. Like I said, it's rejuvenating to be in front of people again. Straight off the back of that, I'm flying home, and then I'm going to the RMIA Risk Conference down in Melbourne. So that's from the 30th of March to 1 April in Melbourne, Australia. So for all the Aussies in the risk and resilience circles, do get along to the RMIA conference. It's going to be very exciting. I very much look forward to seeing you all in person. I'm going to drop some links into the chat if it hasn't already been done. There's a few link trees. So if you want to have a look at any of the upcoming events, there's an Illumina link tree there. If you want to make contact with Vanessa and have a big conversation, which is again rejuvenating in its own right, please do hit the link tree there. And James is always available on LinkedIn and always up for a big chat as well. So we're pretty much out of time, guys. I'm going to say one more thank you very much, James Green, Vanessa. Fantastic to have you both. This has been a really, really, really good session. I've really enjoyed it. And I'm going to say another big thank you to everyone who turned up today. And I mean, really turned up. Again, great to see that chat channel just absolutely on fire. It takes the community to move the discipline forward. So I really appreciate some diversity of thought there, some challenging questions. It's always good. And please do, if everyone's interested, we'll look to do another big resilience reset in the future. Let us know. We do have a feedback form coming straight through as a pop-up. Please provide feedback. Feedback is a gift. We do treat it accordingly. So I really appreciate it. James, Vanessa, again, thank you very much.